Welcome to the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast. Today I'm joined by Matt Hogue, Vice President of Intercollegiate Athletics and University Recreation at Coastal Carolina University. Matt, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Travis, I really appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, you all have made some big splashes in college athletics, obviously last year, and we're going to get into a lot of that, more than just football, but about the institution. I'd like to start, if you can just give those that aren't aware about the details of the institution. You've been there a long time. What can you maybe profile the actual institution as far as where you all are located, something interesting about those features, what type of institution it is, and then on the athletic side, the obvious of athletic conference, number of sports athletes, things like that.
Sure. So Coastal Carolina University is located in Conway, South Carolina, which for those that are familiar with the South Carolina coast, where our actual campus is about 9 to 10 miles from the ocean front and the Myrtle Beach Grand Strand tourist destination. So we're in what we feel is a really beautiful part of the world and a great place to live and work. Our school is nearing its 70th anniversary. We were founded in 1954 and really kind of founded out of the ethic and the fabric of the local community, wanting to find a way to provide, as you read in our history, the sons and daughters of Horry County, an opportunity for higher education. And that started the journey of CCU, which has been a quick growing and vibrant one for many, many years. My time at Coastal began in 1997, so I've just passed 24 years working with the institution. I guess you could say in some ways I'm kind of a unicorn in this business of college athletics, in that I've been with one school for that long without having maybe moved around as much. But I think that really speaks to, the way this place has changed and the way it's grown, because we always seem to have yet another new challenge or another new opportunity that has come along. When I started here, my role was to be in the broadcast side of things. I was hired to be an assistant sports information director and also to broadcast our games. At that time, we carried basketball games. We didn't even have a football team yet or a program. So that's how I started out on the communication side. That quickly started to evolve into other types of areas, marketing and sponsorship sales. Started working with supervising programs and really had an opportunity to get engaged in the administration of a college athletic program at the Division I level. And then shortly thereafter, moved into the role of calling other games, baseball, football, as we added properties. And then after probably about 10 years working in the athletic department, I actually transitioned across campus as an associate vice president for our marketing and communication office, university communication. So it gave me an opportunity to really dive into a whole different area as far as seeing the institution and the university from a different perspective. I was not day-to-day in athletics. I continued to call games and to broadcast. But other than that, I got more immersed in how do we promote other aspects of the institution? How do we promote other programs? And what are we doing to amplify our brand and that sort of thing at that time. And then in 2014 was asked to slide over into the interim director of athletics role. That became permanent roughly a year later. And that's where I've been since then. But, from an athletic standpoint, we have 19 sports here, a Division I institution. Coastal's actually been a Division I school for well over 30 years. In fact, closing in on about 35 years since transitioning back in the mid 80s. We're up to the 19 sport mark after most recently adding beach volleyball. We have 11 women's sports. We have 8 men's sports. And really has been, I think, one of the great stories, I think, and not just from my tenure in the athletic director role, but for, a couple of decades. We've had an incredible journey as an athletic department. We added football prior to the 2003 season. And just the growth and the success has been phenomenal during that time, especially given the young age of our institution.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that's interesting to me was I like to look at the origins of an institution, and so it's been good to look at all these schools of people I've been interviewing at, and Coastal Carolina is no different because it was part of the University of South Carolina system until 1993. And Dr. Benson and I talked about this on the podcast last year. And having been a USC alum, that I noticed, what was that like initially coming to Coastal after all that time as a Gamecock, where it's now an independent institution, but it keeps a rooster logo, the Chanticleer. And what's it like just seeing that growth that you just talked about?
Well, for me, I arrived here probably about 3 to 4 years after that particular separation had occurred, where Coastal became a separate independent state institution, breaking away from the USC system. So I think most of the dust had probably settled for the most part by the time I got here. And actually, the rebranding, the changing of our logo colors had already occurred at that time as well. The Chanticleer nickname is interesting because it actually has its roots with an English professor here at CCU back in the early 60s when athletic teams started to formalize. Now, at that time, the university was only a 2-year school and would remain such up until the early part of the 1970s. But there were a handful of programs that were starting to form. We had, at that time, a men's basketball program, which actually, for the most part, competed against the other University of South Carolina branches. There were a few other programs that started, baseball, for example, but basketball was really the preeminent one. And there was a professor named Cal Maddox, who was an English literature professor. And obviously, because there was a connection at the time to USC, he was looking for something that would both combine the what you're looking for in a mascot, the competitive aspect, the fierce part, but also something that would have an intellect and would maybe, I guess, in some way symbolize what he did, which was teach literature. And that's kind of how the Chanticleer was born, obviously coming from Geoffrey Chaucer and Canterbury Tales. So, we like to say that our version is a rooster that kind of gets the job done through cunning and wit. and I think it's also been a great symbol, for, again, kind of the DNA of our institution, going back to when the university was originally founded, taking having classes in the old Conway High School here in our backyard. We've always had, I think this, I don't know what you call it, maybe an underdog mentality, or feel maybe we're overlooked or perhaps underrated at times, but there's always been this resilient force that, we're going to overcome the challenges, we're going to overcome, the impediments to be great. And when you look at what's happened in a short period of time at our institution, that's something that's happened. And that's, I would say, when I first got here, for me, it was an opportunity to get into college athletics and to pursue my original dream, which was to be a play-by-play announcer for either a college team or a pro team exclusively. I'd worked in Columbia in the media, had my own talk show for a period of time on an all sports station, had kind of worked in the trenches of day-to-day corporate radio. And, there were some things that didn't go very well there as ownership changes occurred and so forth for me. So, I was ready to pursue something different. So it was a great landing spot. And, I didn't know at that time I'd be here 24 years later, but I think I captured very quickly that this place was on the move. And it was one that I would have an opportunity to really maybe provide a major contribution to and leave my stamp. And I feel like I've had a chance to do that in a lot of ways. But you quickly understood that there was really an attitude and I think a belief that let's take this university to a grand level. Let's take this university to a prestigious level. No matter what anyone says anywhere about what we can and can't do. And I think we've seen that DNA in effect for many years.
Yeah, it's obvious once doing your research into the team's histories and the athletic department and the institution. And I don't think you all will be seen as a I think there'll still be some doubters about, prove it again, do it again. I'm sure there's the same way here at, at IU with our success we had. And, people just for, not really comparisons, but situational stories. If we're talking football last year, I mean, IU, Coastal Carolina, both just back and forth all year, and two really good success stories, two national coaches of the year for football. And so we'll talk more about football. I want to kind of focus on, you've talked about your previous positions that you had before. And so, I think it was like 17 years you were the voice of the Chanticleers, and you talked about all the different ways that you had done that. I'm curious, how do you think those experiences actually help the role of an athletic director? Because obviously with, this is just my look at it, never doing that. I mean, you tell the stories of the athletes and the coaches, and you talk to them all the time, and you are literally a fan of every sport. What else maybe, including that, really helps with that AD role now, being there for so long?
Well, one thing that a good play-by-play announcer is going to have either a gifted acumen for, or perhaps they acquire it or learn it, is an attention to detail and an attention to a lot of small pieces that mean something. And that's what I try to convey over to this position. And I think that's one thing that has helped me, because when you're calling a game, you have to pronounce names right. You got to get names correct. If you're going to be using a lot of statistical information or supporting information, you want that to be accurate. Obviously, you got to get the score correct every time you announce that. So I think it gets you into a discipline, maybe sometimes to a point where when you're working with others, that might be, they're like, hey, let's quit talking about the details so much. But that's kind of how I'm wired. And I think you learn that from calling games, because there's such a preparation involved. And there's also, you tend to catalog a lot of information, which can be very helpful when, you're maybe in a negotiation, or you're perhaps having to iron out a problem or a dispute. Being able to have that ability to recall, and then again, paying attention to the details. I don't have, I have colleagues that probably would maybe have a different feeling on some of this, but I enjoy getting involved in some of the minutia that occurs with an athletic department. I want to sit down with our compliance director and understand the details of what's going on, because I think what a lot of my role has to be, this could be at a board of trustee meeting, or maybe at a Rotary Club presentation, or any sort of interaction that you might have. I feel like it's my job to try to take the complicated, which is a lot of what we do in this business. It's not simple. There's complexities and there's explanation that needs to occur. Take that and kind of crunch it down into something that, the person who's maybe uninitiated can understand. And there's such a wide range of topics in our business that really conform to that. I get frustrated at times. We have such a instantaneous, second by second information flow in our country now, and there's a lot that's fascinating and incredibly, engaging about that. But at the same time, I think we leave a lot of important details and a lot of important explanations by the roadside when that happens. And, we see it every day. It can lead to problems. It can lead to issues. It can lead to productivity issues with companies and universities and any organization. So I really pride myself on trying to sort of take the complexity, work that ball of clay, and then have the ability to go in front of a group that doesn't want to hear that complexity, and be able to hit the bullet points and make sure there's depth and understanding of the issue, but not in a way where they've tuned out within 4 or 5 minutes. So I guess maybe that's something that I've transitioned from the broadcast and the play-by-play, because one of the things you obviously have to do if you're a broadcaster is you've got to understand when to showcase brevity. You've got to understand getting out to a commercial on time. I've done a lot of games on TV, and you've got a producer in your ear all the time telling you when you're going to a commercial and counting you out or counting you back in. You've got to slide in a sponsor maybe at a certain time. So I think a lot of that skill set plays very well and is helpful for me as I go through my daily job as athletic director.
Yeah, with that type of job, I can see from what you explained some similarities, but probably some differences in your marketing background. And so you also served as the university's associate VP of marketing, where you did marketing strategies, and then you also oversaw the university's trademark licensing program. And I'm sure that licensing is very valuable nowadays. But regarding that area, what ways can you see Coastal Carolina athletics continuing to try and be that front porch? We say that a lot in college athletics, but I only bring it up at schools where I think it truly is. And if you think about just from knowing President Benson now, I feel comfortable saying he sees athletics as a huge window on that front porch of the institution's future. How do you leverage the recent capital? How do you capitalize on the success and the national exposure you all received?
I think you take every opportunity to tell that story, because you're going to get opportunities when you're having this kind of success that we've had, particularly last year after the football success. An opportunity like this, for example, you take every opportunity to tell that story. Certainly from a licensing standpoint, we've seen tangible evidence of that, and that means revenue flow that can come in from the sale of product and that sort of thing. The front porch analogy, it's kind of interesting because I was hearing that 25 years ago for the first athletic director I worked for, a gentleman named Buddy Sasser, who was a Conway native and has deep roots in this area. Our Hall of Fame is named after him, and he's one of the first ones I ever heard say that. I think for me though, we always know that good, bad, or indifferent, an athletic department inherently is going to be in the public eye. Obviously, in our country and our society, we have a significant, fanaticism and compassion and passion for sports, and particularly for college athletics and what it means to kind of bringing people together. And it's a tie that binds in a lot of ways. So we always know it's going to be on that front step. But for me, it's more about what are you doing to use that more as a sophisticated portal to get people engaged with your institution as a whole. And that's one thing I always talk about. I don't want to just be on the front porch where people see it and, hey, that's a nice house, I like it. I want them to know about all the rooms of the house. I want them to understand that, at our university, we've added tremendous graduate degrees. We now have doctoral degrees. And these are things 20 years ago, a lot of folks probably thought our university would never have. What we're doing in the areas of, cybersecurity and intelligence, which is a new major we have. It's been incredibly popular. We're one of only 20 schools in the country with a professional golf management dual track program that makes you a PGA professional, along with an award-winning Wall School business degree. So, it's how can we use athletics to put forward thrust into all of the other great things that are happening at our institution, and then also as a recruiting force. I think one of the things that was where this really was apparent, certainly from my perspective, last fall, we had a great year in football. Obviously, we had a lot of tension. People know that story, and they watched us. We like to say we were maybe the second coming of America's team, with deference to the Cowboys for how last year played out. But we were also doing that within a climate where, think about this now, normal university recruitment could not happen the way it normally does. There were no admissions counselors traveling the country. There were very few face-to-face meetings. Tours and personal interaction on campuses were limited if they occurred at all. So future students, for maybe the first time in the history of higher education, were making decisions. They were evaluating schools strictly from a virtual or digital perspective. And we happen to be in that space with an incredible athletic story at the same time. So what does that now do for your recruiting? What role did that perhaps play in what may be a record-setting fall semester of enrollment for us this year? Which really, when you think about that, is a significant accomplishment, considering that at this institution for 2 decades, we've been all about incredible growth as a student body that really kind of bucked a lot of the national trends. And we're on the precipice of what will probably be our largest freshman class ever. So, that's, I think in a nutshell, that's for me, what we can do in athletics is it's not just about the success or the winning or the passion that comes with our fans and other people engaging us, but it really can provide a higher gear for moving everything else at the institution forward. And I think you see that, that may be more something that is, accepted and maybe understood when you're talking about the major R1 research institutions out there. That connectedness is maybe more understood than maybe a school like us that's growing. But it's happening here too, and that's the thing that ultimately makes me the most proud, because when you get into the national consciousness, which is happening with our football program, that provides great opportunity if we do our job as an institution to get everything else into the national consciousness, and that's where it comes down to.
Yeah, I was so I did this road trip with I put about it on Twitter of the HEA road trip, and this past May I went to visit my best friend in Wilmington, and so I naturally decided I'm going to stop at 17 schools in 4 days, and putting all this content together for video, and that's where I got the presidential tour from President Benson, and
Sure.
got the golf cart tour and got to see all.
We have a few golf carts, by the way.
Yeah, you definitely do. And it was kind of a celebration of being vaccinated fully and getting to finally travel. I was on furlough from work from COVID, and so but these facilities, just for people who haven't been there, I mean, I got to see. For one, I'd love to know in all the schools in North and South Carolina how many bricks are on college campuses. But it is beautiful. We use limestone out here, and it's beautiful too. But these bricks are just so awesome. And some of the facilities that I saw, for example, the football stadium, obviously, baseball and softball stadiums are incredible. The track doesn't have a lot of bricks, but it is very cool teal track. And then we went inside the arena where basketball and volleyball compete, and you also saw just these other things. And I just think that the bricks pair really well with the rest of the campus academically. It's a beautiful place. What has the institution's strategy been over the years in establishing these facilities? Because it seems like I think Brooks is the name that I saw at a couple of schools. And so I'm sure there's certain donors, but how are you all, strategically coming out with these facility ideas? And then how are they typically funded, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, first of all, great point on the architecture, Travis, because that's something that I think is really distinguishing about our institution. Is really from day one, we've been able to keep a consistent architecture. And when you think about that through, different administrations, and you have presidents, obviously, that change through the years, and board members, to be able to have a consistent look with your buildings, whether it's your science, area, quad, or whether it's an athletic area or the business school, it all has that Georgian architecture and the brick flavor to it, as you point out. So that's something we're very proud of. And as a younger school, that was maybe easier to accomplish, but it definitely sets the tone when you come on our campus. I think, again, one of the things that I think we've really done a nice job of this institution, and it's historically been one of the real attributes of this institution, is again being able to figure out creative ways to attack complex problems. We're in a state where, through the years, we haven't had a tremendous, we have great relationships in Columbia, and we've seen great growth there in terms of what the state of South Carolina can provide in terms of appropriations. But through the years, we haven't been one of the highest on the list in terms of those appropriations. So what it has really set the impetus for this institution is, how are we going to solve those problems kind of, of our own volition? And you mentioned the financing approach and so forth. And, I think we've done a great job through the years institutionally of taking a very entrepreneurial approach to how we do things, which has helped us, get stuff done. When you look at the strategy for building our facilities, we've had great donors. We've had great private support. You mentioned the Brooks family, Bob Brooks, who was, many people know him as being the owner of the Hooters franchise. But he was somebody who actually grew up here in Horry County and became a self-made success story in terms of his business. Long before he owned that franchise, he had a lot of other businesses. So his family and even on further, his widow, Tammy Springs Brooks, whose name is on the baseball stadium, has continued that great legacy of giving and philanthropic support. But we also have some interesting instruments at our disposal. We have something that's people kind of just refer to as the penny or the 1 cent sales tax in Horry County, which is a unique financing instrument that is germane only to our county in South Carolina, for example. And it allows a small portion of that 1 cent sales tax to flow to higher education. So ourselves and the technical college that's here locally can benefit from that to be able to pay debt on capital projects. So, unique financing structures like that is something that has helped us through the years. We can't specifically use that 1 cent option on an athletic facility, but obviously if you're able to take the pressure off in some other projects, it opens the door to be able to finance different ways for an athletic project. But at the end of the day, our athletic foundation has been incredibly supportive through the years. You take the baseball softball project, for example, that was about a $15.5 million project. Almost 8 years ago now, which is hard to believe. And our Chanticleer Athletic Foundation was very instrumental in making that happen. They pledged and raised about 50% of that. So it's a mosaic of different instruments that I think we've used to get where we've needed to be through the years. But at the end of the day, I would again emphasize that the ethic is we're not real good at taking no for an answer. We're not real good at saying you can't. Because at Coastal, we always figure out how to get there and how to win.
Yeah, it's going to these athletic villages at the bigger schools is definitely a trend lately, and you all have kind of an athletic village, but it just happens to be right in the middle of your campus because your campus isn't huge, it's not small, but you could almost walk from a athletic facility or where your athletic department building is, that your athletic building could be any other building on campus. It's just, they look so similar. And I appreciate that aspect of it. I just think walking on the softball stadium and the baseball stadium was incredible. And, I want to the last thing about facilities I want to talk about is it's also worth noting baseball and softball have an awesome hitting and practice facility that I'm not sure if golf uses it as well too, but it's an indoor. And then now you all, the day after I left campus, so I was able to talk to President Benson about this a little bit, but before it, I'm not a breaking news person here on Higher Ed Athletics, so I let it sit and come out. But obviously the Board of Trustees met and approved some significant updates for football. Can you talk about some of those plans and why you all felt like was now the time to go all in on the football upgrades, or was this something years in the making that just happened to line up about that?
Well, I think obviously the timing has been really good with the announcement of working on the indoor practice facility and then some other ideas that we have to kind of tie the rest of our stadium property together. But, some of those ideas were already there. I think we've had the need for the indoor facility for some time. There's a practical, obviously, need for it. We're in an area where you're in that crucial 30-day practice window in August. We have lots of late afternoon thunderstorms, and with the precautions in place now for lightning detection and the radius for lightning, there's a lot of practices that get interrupted. They get maybe canceled, or you have to do something that's obviously not ideal in terms of the preparation for your team. And then the second part is obviously we're in an area where you always have the threat of tropical weather. Again, the highest peak or the peak of the season is usually during the time when football is trying to prepare and practice. So you've got that practical need, but obviously in terms of the student athlete experience and the competitive environment, I don't I don't know that I'm a big fan of the word arms race. I think it's more than that in terms of the experience you're trying to provide. Recruiting is incredibly competitive. We know that now with so many other things that are out there in the world of college athletics. But if you look around our conference and you look around at the competition that we've chosen to compete with, that's a project that we need, and it's a project that we're happy our leadership, certainly at the board level, understands. Now it's our job to go out and support that in terms of the private support, the private fundraising that is needed, and so on and so forth. So we're really excited about that. We are hopeful to get that fast tracked here very soon, and then also looking at other aspects of how we can complete the south end zone of our stadium. We've got some great ideas. Dr. Benson's been incredibly super with leading that, and how you mentioned it earlier, how you may be able to tie together the academic and athletic aspect of a building such as that. And we're looking at some innovative ways to maybe do that now.
That's awesome. And now I want to we'll focus in on the football success as we wrap up. So Coastal's football program, the Sun Belt in general just seems to be such an incredible football conference right now, and seemed to catch everyone's surprise in 2020. But it's not like you all just woke up one August and was a great program. Admittedly, I had Dr. Benson on the podcast week 3 of the season, and I think you all had just had a game with Campbell or another school that was postponed because of COVID or weather, one of the two. And so you were just 3-0. So I wasn't aware that you all were going to go on. I joked with them saying like, this one's really going to blow up if you guys run the table. And but you didn't just wake up.
You were the soothsayer.
I didn't want to say it, but I was. And but it gave me a chance to really look at Coastal Carolina and see athletics. But at what point did you see early signs of this team being able to launch into the national spotlight?
Well, I think, it was probably our opener, which turned out to be at Kansas, in the second week of the season. So we didn't actually play the opening week. And, it was such a kind of a crazy run up to what is the schedule going to look like with the COVID changes and conferences only playing conference games. And maybe in the case of the Big 12, for example, we were the only non-conference game that Kansas played because the league only allowed them to play one. So it was a stressful few weeks in August just trying to arrive at what the schedule is going to be, particularly those non-conference games. And fortunately, we were able to get everything kind of reinstalled. And I felt like going in, like, given the overall climate, we had a schedule that structurally set up well. We didn't play the first week, so we still had more time to kind of work through testing protocols and preparation. We had another open date, which might have been the time when you met with Dr. Benson in late September, that turned out to be kind of strategically placed for us. So I thought the schedule ended up setting up pretty well. We were only going to play 11 games. We weren't able to really get to a 12th game, but we kind of deferred away from the 12th game more so to have a schedule that allowed us flexibility should we need it because of the potential for having to cancel a game or miss a game, or, if you had a COVID situation. So it set up well from the start. But I think when we played our opener at Kansas, the way we came out of the gate and played so well in the first quarter, second quarter, built a big lead. We saw the emergence of Grayson as our quarterback, which we knew he had great potential, but he hadn't really played a lot as the starter. The previous year, we'd seen him in some games, coming in late or maybe backing up in some cases. And it was all just like, wow, this team, it looks like the building has finally materialized, and we've got a lot of pieces there. We had a defense that had really settled in and was playing aggressively. We had a lot of senior leadership, and I think the way we went and won that game and did it, on national TV, a lot of people had a chance to watch us on FS1. It really was just a catapult. And then again, the schedule, I think, really set up well for us after that. We had our first conference game at home. And then at the end of the day, we were able to manage through the COVID situation probably as well as anybody in the country. To be able to, we had some issues, as people know, when you get to the tail end of the season with the championship game of the Sun Belt. But we were able to work through the season without maybe that major pitfall, and it allowed us to keep the momentum going. But I think you had a lot of the ingredients that you have to have for a successful season and a successful team. We had obviously great talent. We had stars that were emerging, but we also had tremendous leadership, and we had a team that was 100% connected to what Jamie and his staff's leadership was teaching and coaching. And when you have those factors come together, it's pretty special what a team can do.
And with all at the time of recording this, the Big 12 influx, you beating Kansas, I guess that means you guys are going to the Big 12. Just kidding. We're not going to put any.
Well, it is. It's a crazy time right now. But you bring up a good point, Travis. I think you've always got to be nimble and prepared, because our landscape probably has changed more in the last 5 years than it did in the 50 years previous across the board. So it is a crazy time. But I'll say this about, you mentioned the Sun Belt, and last year was great, but this was something that had been building. That's really true. Over the last few years, the Sun Belt's had the best winning percentage in bowl games. Last year, 21 non-conference wins, which was the most in FBS. And you see it across the board, where every school, every program they're committed. They are invested to be a factor in FBS football. And I think you've got a chance to see another incredible season this year. It's very likely that we'll have two teams ranked in the preseason top 25, ourselves and Louisiana. Certainly believe that will occur. So the Sun Belt has, really just in 20 years as a football league has reached the forefront. When you compare it to the other group of 5 conferences, we've moved up the ranks in the last few years there as well. So it's pretty impressive what's happening in this league. And you could see it even, as we were recording this, I was just getting back in from our media day down in New Orleans, and it was palpable how much more attention is being bestowed to the Sun Belt because of this success.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for how the bowl structure is, like the New Year's Eve bowls of automatic things, I mean, if you look at just rankings, IU and Coastal, some of the projections, they were going to play each other in a bowl game. And
right.
You're talking about 2 schools that have emerged with football, using footballs lately. And, I like paying attention to the Sun Belt. I mean, I had Charlie Cobb from Georgia State. He's been on the podcast. What he helped build at Appalachian State, taking it over to Georgia State. They buy an MLB baseball stadium and turn it into a football
Sure.
stadium. So that's a campus building. So I know they're going to be, it's just such a competitive conference and truly fun to watch. And, I got to visit Campbell and some other schools in the area that, and then other Sunbelt schools are going to be, it's just an incredible league. And, but I'm curious about the initial reaction whenever Coastal decided to go to FBS, because that's the other thing. You all have had football since, I think, 2003, you said something like that, but you haven't been FBS that long. And that is kind of another reason why it just seems like, it came out of nowhere. But what was the initial reaction around campus? Because you were there. I mean, whenever you all decided to go to FBS.
Well, I think those who are our true supporters and the fans and so forth, it was greeted with a lot of support. Again, if you follow the trajectory of our institution, that was the next logical step for us. And when we made that decision, one of the real key facets of that was an expectation that at some point down the road, we didn't know when necessarily, that what we're talking about now with playoff expansion would be in the offing. And we wanted to be in the picture and in a position to be able to do that. Now, the actual process of us moving to FBS and the Sun Belt probably happened a lot faster than maybe it does for some schools. We had some studies and we had looked at it, obviously. But again, being ready, and when the landscape changes, being able to react to that was really the key to that situation, because we went from probably first contact to having a press conference announcing that we were joining the Sun Belt in less than about 3 months. And that's an accelerated process for how these things typically occur, at least moving up to FBS. Now, you may see a school, and we see a lot of the reports now, obviously, that's already at the FBS level could maybe change conferences in that same type of swift timeline. But to move up, it happened very quickly for us. So we were in a position where, from a leadership standpoint, quick decisions had to be made. And fortunately, our board of trustees had put our president in a position where he could do that at that time. And that went back several years prior. Certainly when you make a decision that is that weighty, there's going to be detractors, and there's going to be questions, and there's going to be challenges. And we faced all of that. I don't think anybody expected that you wouldn't. And we found creative ways to overcome those challenges. It's something that I'm incredibly proud of. And, back in 2016, 2017, when a lot of this was happening, I can remember, kind of half kidding with some of our folks around campus that, 2020 is going to be the year. That'll be the year when we've matured recruiting classes at the FBS. We've got our scholarship number ultimately where it needs to be, because that's something that when that transition is made, the NCAA has you go through that 2-year transition period. But what I think gets lost on a lot of folks is, because of the way the NCAA rules work with initial counters and signing classes and all that, you can't just go from 63 to 85. It doesn't work that way, because you would never be able to do it unless you were signing more than 25 kids a year, which you obviously you can't do. So it was going to take time to get the scholarship number up. And, we joked around, hey, 2020 will be our year. And of course, we see what happened last year. Everything, coalesced and came together. But, we're extremely proud. And I know I'm personally very proud of the hard work and the vision that our institution showed to take that step, because now we're seeing, it's hard when you're going through that at the beginning to be able to see what the fruits of it are and what the benefit truly will be when you found success going to that level. And sometimes that's hard, because you're kind of selling more a dream than you are, you're selling Disney World before it was built in the swamps of Orlando in a lot of ways. But last year was so rewarding and gratifying, because it displayed, I think, a validation of what it is we saw we could do and where we could go. Now the key is you got to maintain it and sustain it. And that may be harder in some ways, but it was incredibly gratifying to see all that hard work and the folks that were in the trenches to make that transition, for everything to happen the way it did.
Do you think the baseball national championship in 2016, in a comparison way, just thinking of the exposure it brought to the institution, did it do that as significantly too, or is that a type of momentum that you think only football or basketball can sustain? Because you all did. I mean, that's a pretty big feat in college baseball.
And we're incredibly proud of it. That will rank as obviously one of the great achievements of all of our careers that we're involved with it. It had the same impact. I think, in some ways the numbers and the analytics you look at are similar. Probably at the tail end of our football run last year, it eclipsed some of that, quite honestly, when you look at what we had with baseball. But both were still incredibly influential. I think they were influential on the branding of our institution. As I mentioned before, they were influential on the recruitment aspect of what we're trying to do in terms of enrolling students. And at the time, I'm not sure that we knew we would see those kinds of numbers and those types of impacts until this past season with football. So I think they're similar in a lot of ways, but the one thing that's very different with baseball is it's almost kind of a crescendo when you go to Omaha and win the national championship. Football, you're playing one game a week. It tends to be these big events. But with baseball, we had really 16 consecutive days of being in the spotlight at a time of the year when there's really not a whole lot of other things going on in college athletics. So you may not have had that one burst. Now, obviously, once we won the deciding game, that was an incredible amount of attention. But you were just kind of consistently there for 2 weeks, and that's the benefit of being in Omaha, because you're playing for so long. And especially as you get to a point where there's only 2 or 3 teams maybe remaining. But, there's differences and there's similarities, but there's no question that both were shining examples of what massive success in athletics can do for you and what it can do to, again, be that portal to your institution and bring attention to what else is going on here, which is a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah, I think women's basketball and softball too are a couple of those other sports that I think it's only going to get more exposure with the popularity growth. And you all, I mean, you had a rough year with women's basketball this past year during COVID. But the year before that, I think you had like program records of
sure
and only lost like 4 games or something. So I'm sure you're going to be right back there. But it's just interesting to see. You mentioned in the end of football season, it does kind of dwindle because all of a sudden everyone's going to bowl mania, and maybe with the new playoff expansion that is likely going to happen, it'll change. But the baseball one, I mean, I never watch outside of my own institution. I don't watch regular season college baseball, but tell you what, I watched almost every single game of the College World Series. I feel like
exactly.
It's an interesting one,
and we would love to get back to Omaha as well. I mean, that's our goal, and that was our goal even before we won it. We had put an emphasis on baseball. We had worked very hard to maintain our coaching staff, particularly Coach Gilmore, who's an alum of this institution, and then we finally had the year where everything kind of came together. But it was something that we obviously are endeavoring to do again, and hopefully one day we'll have that opportunity.
Well, I want to end it on 2 tactical questions for the people that listen to this, or from what I understand, are typically practitioners in college athletics, and
sure.
and I'm sure also listening is probably President Benson because of but also there is a former classmate of mine who just took a assistant professor job in sport management at Coastal. So Dr. Nick Webster. So he's probably I'll probably send him this. But for those generally nationally across the country, before being appointed AD, you said at the beginning that you were the interim AD as well. So you had already been at the institution for several years, as we talked about. I think that's common now, especially during COVID, where there's internal hires after serving as the interim. And I'm curious, for those that might find themselves in a similar situation, what was your mindset during that interim phase? And what did you try to do in order to not only demonstrate you were the right person for the job, but also not putting yourself out there too much so that if you didn't get the job, you basically it would not be a fit to remain?
So I think the first part of my answer on that would be that, and this may not be the right answer for everyone who gets in that situation, but I felt like because of the time I had been at the institution, and this was really home for me, and there was a comfort level for, my attitude's always been whatever Coastal asked me to do to serve is kind of the way I approached it. So I didn't go into the interim role feeling like it was an audition. I went into it more as, okay, the interim may be on the label, but I'm not going to operate any differently. There's business that has to be attended to. You've got to keep things moving forward. It wasn't but probably about a month after I had actually been made the permanent AD when the Sunbelt situation started developing. So, if you had maybe a different attitude that I'm just going to maybe kick back, or, I'm only going to do this, and then once they hire somebody, I'll move out. Maybe we missed that window potentially. So I think you have to go into it 100%. I don't think you have any other option, and really be true to yourself and try to operate the way that you see fit, because you've got dynamics at play. It could be, what may be happening with a particular program on the coaching front, or maybe a facility that really needs, energy every day to get pushed forward. And we had several construction projects that were actually either wrapping up or in the midst of happening when I took over as the interim. So for me, that was the approach. I think you have to really dive in and take the attitude that, if somebody else is looking at it as an audition, that's fine. But I think if you start thinking of it that way, you probably aren't going to be genuine to yourself in terms of how you would make decisions and how you would strategize and move forward.
I really appreciate the the word that comes to mind is the service that, our athletic director after Fred Glass retired is Scott Dolson. He's been here since the Bob Knight era and worked his way through it and knows the institution better than anyone. And I think you've seen a lot of people hired within with these AD jobs lately. And I think some people think it's maybe because they don't feel like doing national search, but I think a big part of it is understanding your institution and the values after coming out of a pandemic and all the things coming to our industry are gonna even be more important. And so I appreciate that part of it. And I'm an IU alum and a current student at IU, so it's fun to be a part of about serving my institution too. And this might tie into this last question. What do you think are the top one or two challenges facing D1 institutions in the next several years that maybe we haven't either discussed nationally a lot or on this podcast? We've obviously talked about a few current term ones, but I'm curious, what, internally or in the Sun Belt or just looking at higher education in general, what kind of is in the back of your head that maybe we're not talking enough about?
I think for me, it's more about understanding, today's generation of athlete, student athlete. They are a generation that comes to us having gone through some very difficult stuff. This pandemic was, maybe a once in a lifetime for all of us, but certainly for that generation and those that are now, re-entering the college or coming into the college space this fall or maybe next fall. They've had a pretty rough couple of years in what they've had to endure. But also when you look at just our society with the prevalence with social media and just the instant absorption of constant information. One thing I think that also has a major impact is we now have a club and, I don't know what you want to call it, maybe the youth sports culture, which I personally have some concerns about because it's become so prevalent as the pathway for many student athletes to get to college athletics or to maybe achieve a scholarship or what have you. And, there's differences between that environment and what the environment is when you come to college and you have a coach, running the program and kind of what the expectations are and what you do. And, I think we have to be very mindful of that transition, especially for those that may be the highest achievers. So I think it's kind of meeting the student athlete today where they are versus where they may have been when I started my career or where they may have been when a coach was coaching 10, 15 years ago. I think the adaptability now is more important for coaches and administrators than maybe it's ever been, because you've got a dynamic in terms, you've got incredibly bright, probably as well educated as ever generation coming into our fold. They're in touch with everything that's happening in our society virtually every minute, in terms of the absorption of social media and technology that we have. And I think we have to understand that and we have to figure out how to manage that, because one of the things that can occur is it creates obviously a lot of stresses. It creates a lot of expectations. And that's why I think you're starting to see, some of the mental health concerns that develop out there, and that's something that we've got to continually be mindful of. We've got to continually figure out creative ways to not just address, obviously, on the reactive side. You always are going to do that, but figure out how to address it on the proactive side. Because you're seeing an environment that's far more challenging, I think, in that regard than it's probably ever been. There's just so much imagery out there now, and personal expectations that maybe a student athlete puts on themselves that they don't have to. There's still a lot of other great things that are going on if maybe you didn't have a good game or maybe you're not playing as much. There's tremendous amount of experience that you can get out of being at a university. And I think we've just got to be very mindful of that and do whatever we can to mold that entire experience.
Yeah, it's I feel like I was so I'm 32. I feel like I was one of the last unique age frame where I got the first iPhone came out, I think when I was like a sophomore, because I had a BlackBerry Curve first, and when I first got my license and loved it, thought it was the coolest thing ever. Now, I'm type 1 diabetic, so I've worn an insulin pump for almost 20 years now. And one of the first things people ask me is like, the question has really stopped, but it was always like, you always have to have that device on you. And I'm like, well, like every single kid that has had a phone on them the same amount of time now, and it's glued to them. And that's just the power of it, where there's always going to be the internet, and everything's in your hand. And that's going to be very different than some older administrations and coaches, that they're not used to. These students, half their life has been spent with a device at least by this point, and it's only going to get, I'm raising I'm about to have my third boy, and so I'll have 3 boys under 5. And the reality is, you want to cut down screen time, but it's also the world they're going to be living in, and education is going that way. So everything, they just have so much technology, can make them aware of everything. And that can make sports even more unique. I mean, because that's even a bigger outlet to be off screen time. But at the end of the day, these are college students that are going to be always on internet and social media and whatever else it takes us. And this would be at the very end, I'm going to mention NIL. We didn't even talk about that. So we spent an hour talking about everything, and finally get to maybe about, I guess you could throw NIL in that. So.
Yeah, well, and it's definitely had plenty of airtime. We know that. I think again, this is something that is kind of akin to what we were just discussing. We're now in an age where these opportunities are there and they're relevant. So it only made sense to provide those opportunities. Again, when you look at a regular, probably don't like to use the term regular student, but when you look at a non-athlete, they've had this opportunity for creating a business, being entrepreneurial, so I think it made sense to provide these opportunities. And I was actually very encouraged to see, like in our state, for example, how quickly legislation not only developed, but was passed, which, state legislature, sometimes those things just don't happen that quickly, but ours did. And there was a lot of great collaboration among our schools too, to get there. So I think everyone understands, this is kind of the next phase, and this is the climate we're going to be in. The key now is for institutions, I think, to keep their eye on the ball and be focused on the things that are going to be important in terms of our role. And that is, as much education as possible about how everything happens, because it's our requirement, I think, really, and our pledge to make sure that we do provide some safety nets for our athletes. We don't want them to be taken advantage of in this marketplace. We want them to take advantage of the marketplace, but understand there can be pitfalls, understand there can be, some nefarious forces that could perhaps impact them negatively. So having them as well educated on all of this as possible is the key. And then what we can do, obviously, to fulfill our compliance and our monitoring standpoint. But other than that, it's a brave new world in a lot of ways, but it's an exciting world if you're a student athlete, because you've got really an open canvas to kind of go out there and create all sorts of ways to capitalize on your talent and your gifts. And that's what I think we have to eventually focus on. Is it going to create challenges? Do we really know where the marketplace is landing just yet? I think there's a lot of unanswered questions, certainly. And I think we've tried to take a graduated approach here in terms of what does some of that auxiliary infrastructure look like, right? But we'll all get there. And I think one thing that I do hear that I think is consistent across the board, despite all of these state laws and so forth, is there's definitely appetite, at least in the colleagues I talk with and so forth, that we would like to be able to find what that national standard, that federal standard can be, so that at least everybody's on the same playing field. I think there is benefit and certainly some there's some integrity to having that national standard, and hopefully we can reach that point. But until then, we have a state law that everybody had buy-in on. We feel like it's pretty fair to all parties, the schools, the athletes, the third parties that would be involved, and we're going to operate under that and feel like it provides a lot of opportunities.
Matt Hogue, Vice President and Athletic Director of Coastal Carolina University. Thanks for being on the Higher Ed Athletics podcast.
Travis, I appreciate the time and your interest in Coastal and giving us an opportunity to tell our story and put our brand out there. So really enjoyed the last hour.